Welcome everyone to the Library of Iron and Ash, where we read stories from monster hunters and the magical prey they pursue. Our first story will be from the Monster Hunter's Journal. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 1. The Spear Knows the Truth. People who hire hunters always begin the same way. They show you what was taken. A burnt beam carried into the hall like a dead child. A half-melted horseshoe. A strip of hide peeled from a flank with such neatness it feels like mockery. They set it down between you and the hearth as if heat will explain heat. Then they watch your face. They want to see fear, because fear makes them feel wise for paying you. Or they want to see confidence, because confidence makes them feel safe. I give them neither. I give them attention. The reeve of Carronford was a heavy man with a voice trained on shouting. He had shouted enough that his words came out already bruised. 3 nights, he told me. 3. First it took goats, then a mule, then old Mira's boy. Not a boy. Mira cut in from the bench by the fire. Her hands were black with soot, her eyes red with it. He was near grown. The reeve glared at her like grief was disobedience. He was young, and it took him, dragged him, same as the mule. I rested my spear against my chair and leaned forward just enough to see the charred beam they'd brought. It was pine, split at one end, blackened along the grain. The burn was uneven, like flame had licked it and then been pulled away. Not a house fire, not lightning. The smell was wrong too, sweet in the back of the nose, like burnt fat, and sharp like metal heated too quickly. Show me where, I said. They always expect more questions in the warmth. Questions about payment, about witnesses, about heroics. But the warmth lies. The world tells the truth outside. We left the hall at dusk, when the sky turned the color of cooling iron. The village huddled against the river like it hoped water would argue with fire. Smoke from cooking hearths crawled low over the roofs. Dogs watched from doorways and did not bark. A hunter notices what does not happen. My armor drew eyes as we crossed the muddy lane. It isn't knight's plate, no polished breastplate, no proud crest. I wear layered mail beneath scale and leather. Plate where it matters, shoulders, forearms, knees, and nowhere else. The pieces are mismatched in the way of hard-earned things. The left pauldron is heavier than the right. It always has been. My spear arm takes more punishment, so I built it to survive the first blow. The villagers watch the way prey watches a new predator, hopeful that it will eat the other thing first. A boy, a real boy this time, stared openly at the runes along my spear haft. His mother pulled him back as if letters themselves could bite. Magic makes people strange. They either worship it or blame it. Most can't bear that it's simply a tool, like a blade. At the edge of the village, the reeve stopped and pointed toward the tree line. Up there, near the old fort stones, the river was swollen from recent rain, slick and loud. Beyond it, the forest rose dark and dense, pines and crooked oaks leaning together like conspirators. Somewhere up there, something had decided the village belonged to it. Mira walked beside me without speaking. She held a small bundle wrapped in cloth. I'd seen bundles like that before. Token offerings, bits of hair, a piece of a child's shirt. People believe the right object can bargain with the world. Sometimes it can. Just not in the way they hope. We reached the first kill site before the light fully left. The goat pen was broken. That was the first lie. People always say the monster tore it apart. But the wood showed X marks on the hinges, rough and hurried. Men had broken in afterward. To look, to see, to touch their fear and make it real. The ground inside the pen was trampled, but not by hooves alone. Deep grooves cut the mud in sweeping arcs. I crouched, ignoring the damp seeping into my knee guard. Tail. Not a serpentine drag. Too heavy for that. This was a tail that lifted and struck and guided the body like a counterweight. I pressed 2 fingers into a groove and brought them to my nose. The mud smelled of river rot and, faintly, resin and heat. The reef shifted behind me. So, what is it? He wanted a name like a charm. Dragon, and the night would feel less complicated. Demon, and it would feel like a story. I stood and walked the perimeter, slow, letting my eyes do what most men forget they can. There were no claw marks on the fence posts. That mattered. Many beasts climb. Few choose not to when they can. The broken boards had been snapped inward, not outward. Something had pushed through from outside, low to the ground. A drake then. Or a wyvern, if it had wings. The lack of wing prints suggested drake. I followed the trail out of the pen. It led toward the riverbank, where stones were scorched black. And on one of those stones I saw the real truth. A smear, dark and dried. Not blood, mucus. I touched it with a gloved thumb. It flaked. Throat gland discharge. Heat-storing creatures often carry volatile oils in their mouths and throats. When they breathe fire, they're not exhaling flame like a forge. They're igniting something their body produces. Something that must be stored, regulated, and occasionally purged. Young drakes purge more often. Their glands overproduce until their bodies learn control. That meant the creature was young. Young meant reckless. Young meant hungry. Young meant it might burn a village by accident just to see what happens. Mira made a sound behind me. Small. Strangled. I turned and saw her staring at the river stones. There were drag marks in the mud. Human drag marks. And then there were footprints. Bare. A child's feet, toes splayed in panic, followed by the long smear where the body stopped walking. People imagine monsters are neat killers, that they take and go. Most are messy. They struggle with prey the way a hawk struggles with a rabbit too large for its talons. Mira's bundle slipped from her hands and fell into the mud. She didn't notice. I didn't speak to her. Comfort is a language that often lies. My job was not to soothe her. My job was to make sure she didn't lose another child, because grief attracts risk, like blood attracts flies. I looked at the reef. Who went after him? His jaw clenched. We did. Men. With torches. Did any come back burnt? No. That told me more than he realized. If men had charged into the woods with torches and lived, the creature had either fled or watched. Either possibility made my stomach tighten. You have hunters? I asked. A few. Trappers. Bring me one who knows these woods. The reef hesitated, pride warring with necessity. Then he turned and barked at one of the men lingering behind us. The man ran back toward the village. While we waited, I opened my pack and checked my gear. Habit is survival. My bowstring was waxed and tight. Broadheads for flesh, barbed heads for tendon, blunt heads for bone. 2 coils of braided wire, resin pellets wrapped in cloth, 3 iron stakes, a pouch of powdered chalk and salt, a vial of bitter black oil that smelled like mushrooms and rot, my own brew, meant for one thing, masking human scent under forest stink. I adjusted my straps. The scaled cuirass over my chest sat correctly, overlapping plates distributing force across my ribs. A claw swipe that would open a man like fruit might skid here, diverting just enough energy to leave bruises instead of organs. The gauntlets were my favorite pieces. Reinforced fingers, but thin palms. You cannot set delicate traps with numb hands. Many hunters forget that and die with strong armor and clumsy fingers. A voice came from behind us. Reef says, "You're hunting it." A man in a patched cloak approached. He was lean in a way that meant he ate when he could. His eyes were sharp, like someone who measures everything because he can't afford mistakes. "I'm Trist," he said. "I know where the old ford stones are. I know where men don't go anymore." I studied him for a heartbeat, then nodded. "You'll guide. You won't lead. You will not run ahead. You will not shout. You will do what I say, when I say it." His pride fled briefly, then he swallowed it. "I? Good. Pride gets men killed. Survival makes them listen." We crossed the river at a shallow point where stones broke the current. The water bit cold through my boots. I kept my weight centered, spear held horizontal for balance. The village disappeared behind us quickly, swallowed by trees and dusk. The forest smelled different than the village. Cleaner, older, less human. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. We moved uphill toward the fort stones Trist spoke of. The ground rose into a narrow ravine where the river had once carved deeper before changing its mind. Moss-covered slick rock. Fallen pine needles muffled our steps. I whispered a word under my breath. Not a shield, not a spell that would stop flame, but a sensory charm. The runes along my spear heft drank a little warmth from my palm and returned it as clarity behind my eyes. Magic should not make you brave. It should make you accurate. "Stop," I murmured when the air changed. Trist froze instantly. The reef and the other 2 men who had insisted on coming, because men always insist, stumbled into stillness behind him. The quiet ahead was the wrong kind. Not the lack of sound, but the lack of small sound. No insects, no distant bird, no rustle of something tiny in leaves. A predator was near and the forest was holding its breath. I lowered myself to a crouch and examined the ground. The trail was obvious now. Broken brush, disturbed needles, occasional scorch marks where something had brushed too close and exhaled warmth. But what mattered most was the pattern. The creature did not move like a bear or wolf. It moved in a glide of weight, low to the earth, with the occasional heavy press where it paused to listen or taste the air. I found a print, 3 forward toes, 1 rear, claws blunt at the tips. Blunt meant it didn't climb often, or it wasn't fully grown. A drake then, and young. Worse. The print was deeper on the left. Injury or imbalance. Injured predators are desperate predators. Triss swallowed audibly. "Caden," he whispered, "you sure this is wise?" I glanced at him. Wisdom isn't what keeps you alive. What does? Preparation. I lifted my gaze toward the ravine ahead. The old fort stones sat there like broken teeth. Ancient standing stones toppled into the gully long ago, carved with symbols worn smooth by rain. Around them, the earth was blackened. The rocks glistened in places as if glazed. Heat had passed through here repeatedly. This wasn't a passing hunt. This was a place the creature returned to. Lair or nest. I motioned for the men to stay back behind a fallen log. They obeyed reluctantly, except the reeve, who lingered as if his presence could influence the outcome. "Back!" I hissed. He retreated, jaw tight. I moved alone toward the stones, spear in hand, bow across my back. Every step was measured. Not quiet. Quiet can be meaningless when dealing with a creature that hears heartbeats, but deliberate. I stopped at the edge of the blackened earth and knelt. There were bones half buried here. Goat, deer, and something else. Something too long in the limb. Not human. I would have smelled it. The bones were scorched and cracked, but not charred through. That meant the creature's flame was hot and brief, more like a blast than sustained breath. Young drake, glands untrained. I found another smear on a stone, oily residue, faintly shimmering. I scraped a little into my knife's groove and sniffed. Tar-like, bitter. The scent of volatile oils. If I wanted to kill it, I could exploit that. If I wanted to survive, I must. I backed away to the narrow pass I'd noticed earlier between two leaning boulders. Perfect funnel. Creatures this size prefer paths that don't scrape their scales. They choose gaps that fit. I began laying my trap. The first was wire, a braided cord reinforced with fine silver threads. Not because silver is holy, but because certain magical creatures react poorly to its resonance. Drakes are half arcane, whether they like it or not. Their flame comes from chemistry and magic both, braided together in the throat. I drove iron stakes into the ground with the back of my axe, soft taps that wouldn't ring. I stretched the wire between them at ankle height, drake ankle, not mine, and threaded bone hooks along it, each carved with a shallow binding sigil. Not a true binding. True bindings require circles and time and payment, and I had neither. This was a bite of magic, enough to sting. Anger makes beasts stupid. I buried the wire under ash and needles, smoothing the surface until it looked untouched. Then I placed resin pellets along the far side of the pass, wrapped in oilcloth, spaced so that if ignited, they would climb into a wall of flame. Fire is not only a weapon, it is also a direction. Most things will not charge through it unless cornered. I created a corner. Further back, I dug a shallow pit, wide enough for the drake's hindquarters, shallow enough that it would not settle comfortably. I lined it with treated yew spikes, not to kill, but to wound. A wounded creature is limited. Limited creatures become predictable. I set a third trap as insurance. A scent lure, brewed from marrow oil, fern, and the faintest drop of human blood. The blood was mine. It had to be. Predators follow scent like men follow stories. When the work was done, I climbed to a rocky shelf overlooking the pass and waited. Waiting is the hardest part for men who have never hunted. They think action is courage. Action is easy. It's a moment. Waiting is hours of imagining teeth. The sky dimmed. Shadows thickened. The men behind me shifted and whispered. I held up a hand and they went still. Trist watched me like he wanted to ask 100 questions but feared the answers. I ate dried meat and drank a mouthful of water, then wiped my hands on ash. I checked my spear blade for nicks. I adjusted my grip, and I listened. The first sign was not sound. It was heat. A faint warmth brushed the back of my neck like breath. I did not turn. Turning too soon can make you visible. Instead, I let my ward do its work. The charm tightened around my senses, pointing my attention without forcing my eyes. To my right, among the trees, the darkness shifted wrong. Then it emerged. The drake moved like a low hill sliding forward. Its scales were dark and matte, swallowing light. Its head was wedge-shaped with small horns that curved back just enough to suggest what they might become. The throat beneath its jaw pulsed faintly, heat shimmering around it as if the air couldn't decide how to behave. Its eyes were gold and unblinking. It tasted the air with a split tongue. Slow, patient, young, but not foolish. It padded toward the fort stones first, circling the blackened earth like it was checking its own claim. It nudged a bone with its snout, then lifted its head sharply. It had caught the scent lure. It turned toward the pass. I tightened my grip on the spear. My armor felt suddenly heavier, as it always does when death becomes possible. The scaled cuirass pressed against my chest. The left pauldron sat like a stone on my shoulder. Good. Weight is real. Fear is smoke. The drake approached the pass carefully, head low, body tense. It paused, one foreleg lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. It knew something was wrong. For a long moment it stood there, listening. Its tail swayed, slow arcs that could break a man's spine without effort. I did not move. Then it stepped forward. The wire snapped tight around its foreleg with a sound like a harp string breaking. Bone hooks bit deep. The binding sigils flared pale blue for a heartbeat. The drake screamed. Not a roar. Roars are declarations. This was pain and surprise and fury. A sound that made the men behind me flinch and curse under their breath. Flame erupted from the drake's mouth in a wild blast, scorching the ground, igniting pine needles. It snapped at its trapped leg, teeth clacking on wire, tail lashing. I rose from the shelf and moved. Downhill, angled to its left, because predators tend to strike forward and right when panicking. My boots found stones and moss without thought. My body knew terrain the way a man knows his own scars. The drake's head whipped toward me, eyes locking on motion. It exhaled again. I ducked behind a boulder as fire washed over it, heat punching through stone like a fist. The air smelled of burning resin and that bitter throat oil. I rolled out the other side as the drake lunged forward, dragging the wire and stakes with it. The stakes tore free sooner than I'd like. Soft earth. But that was expected. traps are not walls. They are suggestions. The drake barreled into the pass, past the resin pellets. I spoke a single word under my breath and flicked a pinch of powdered salt and chalk into the air. The ward caught and held for a heartbeat, a tiny net of magic that turned my tossed spark into a line. The resin pellets ignited. Flame blossomed upward in a sheet, not hot enough to melt rock, but hot enough to force instinct. The drake recoiled, stumbling backward, exactly as planned. Its hind legs found the pit. The ground gave way beneath it, and it crashed down hard. Spikes drove into flesh. The drake thrashed, screaming again, tail striking rock with brutal force. A tail blow like that could pulp a man inside his armor. I stayed out of its reach. That's why I use a spear. I stepped to the edge of the pit and drove the spear forward, into the soft joint beneath the jaw, angled up and back. The rune along the blade burned cold, biting through scale into warm tissue. The drake convulsed, and heat exploded from its throat in an uncontrolled burst. Fire blasted sideways, scorching the pit wall, licking at my greaves. The metal grew hot instantly. I felt the heat through the padding. I twisted the spear, felt resistance, then a wet release. The drake's body slammed against the spikes, shuddering. It tried to bite me, but its jaw wouldn't close right now. My blade had severed what mattered. It locked its gold eyes on me. In that gaze there was no evil, no malice, only life refusing to end. People think monsters hate us. Most don't. Most don't think about us at all, except as meat that screams. I held its gaze anyway. It felt like the only honest thing left to do. "I'm sorry," I said, not because it would forgive me, but because the words kept me from turning into something else. The drake's breath came in wet pools, then slower, then nothing. The forest exhaled. Behind me, the men shouted. Relief, triumph, prayers. Trist said nothing. I withdrew my spear carefully and stepped back, keeping my eyes on the drake, even after the stillness came. Death is a trickster. Some creatures play it well, and some take a final breath that is more weapon than breath. Only when the throat no longer shimmered with heat did I let my shoulders lower. The reeve came scrambling forward despite my earlier warning. "It's dead?" he demanded, as if doubting death could bring his people back. "It's done," I said. Mira had followed too. She stopped at the edge of the pit and stared down at the drake, as if expecting her son's hand to reach up from beneath it. Her grief was quiet now. Quiet grief is heavier than loud grief. "Did it?" Her voice cracked. "Did it suffer?" I considered lying. Lies are kind sometimes, but they are still lies. "Yes," I said, briefly. She nodded once, as if that answer was something she could carry. Then she reached into her bundle and pulled out a strip of cloth, small, torn from a shirt. She held it out toward me without looking away from the drake. "Find him," she whispered. "Please." I took the cloth. It was stained at one edge with river mud and something darker. Blood. I breathed in carefully. Human blood, yes, but also something else. Smoke, resin, and a faint sourness that didn't belong to drake oil. My ward tightened around my senses. Not all monsters kill with flame. Some burn you without fire. I looked toward the ford stones, then deeper into the trees beyond. Did anyone see which way it dragged him? I asked. Triss cleared his throat. North, toward the old marsh, I'd wager. There's sinkholes there. Old ruins too, half swallowed. The reef shifted uncomfortably. There's nothing up there but rot. I kept my eyes on the trees. Rot is never empty. I knelt beside the pit and began the work they don't celebrate. Harvest. It is not cruelty. It is economy. It is respect in my way. If I kill a creature, I do not let its body feed only worms unless I have to. I take what can keep me alive on the next hunt. What can pay for supplies? What can be studied, so I kill fewer things blindly. I cut a section of throat gland, carefully, with my knife angled to avoid bursting it. I removed scales from the shoulder where they were thickest. I took marrow from a foreleg bone. Drake marrow burns hot and steady and can be turned into lamp oil that doesn't freeze in winter. As I worked, I spoke quietly, not to the men, but to myself. Observation keeps the mind from drifting into the pit with the beast. The drake's scales were matte, designed for camouflage in shadowed woods. The horn nubs were soft at the base, young. The foreleg it had stepped into my trap with was slightly swollen near the joint. Old injury. That explained the deeper prints. An injured young male, pushed out of territory by older kin, driven toward easy prey, driven toward villages, driven toward becoming a story. When I finished, I wiped my knife on ash and packed my harvest away in oilcloth. The men kept their distance now, as if disassembling the monster might make the fear too real. Mira watched, not with revulsion, with the grim attention of someone learning what the world truly costs. Night had settled fully by the time we started back. Torches were lit. Their flames flickered weakly beneath the trees, humbled by the darkness. Fire that feels strong in a hearth feels small in the wild. My armor creaked once as I shifted my pack. I tightened the strap to stop it. Sound is a language monsters speak better than men. Trist walked beside me. "You're not done," he said softly. "No," I replied. "How do you know?" I held up the strip of cloth Mira had given me. "Because it still smells like him." "The drake?" I shook my head. "No." I didn't say more. Men don't listen well when the truth is worse than they paid for. We returned to Caron Ford under a sky full of cold stars. The villagers gathered, staring at the drake scales in my pack and the soot on my greaves, as if those things were proof the world could still be negotiated with. The reef announced loudly that it was over, that the beast was dead. People cheered because cheering is easier than thinking. Mira did not cheer. She stood in the shadow of the hall doorway, hands folded tight, waiting for the part of the story that belonged to her. I walked to her and spoke low. "I'll go at first light." Her eyes searched mine. "You'll bring him back?" I didn't promise what I couldn't deliver. She nodded, as if that was all she'd allowed herself to hope for. Inside the hall, they set food in front of me. Stew, thick with root vegetables. Bread hard enough to be used as a weapon. Ale poured with shaking hands. I ate because hunger doesn't pause for grief. While they talked around me, too loud, too relieved, I sat with my back against a timber post and inspected my gear again. I loosened my gauntlets, flexed my fingers, checked for blisters. I wiped soot from the rune carvings on my spear haft and traced them once, feeling the faint warmth of magic settling back into dormancy. Magic is like a beast itself. If you don't watch it, it grows wild. When the hall finally quieted and men began to sleep in their benches, Trist approached and sat across from me. "You're going alone," he said. "I always do." He hesitated. "I'll guide you to the marsh. After that, I won't pretend I can keep up." That was honest. Honesty is rare and valuable. "You can guide," I agreed. "But you will stop when I tell you." He nodded. I looked down at my armor, scratched, stained, worn in places where old fights had left their signatures. No piece was perfect, but every piece had a purpose. There is comfort in purpose. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened to the hall, the crackle of the hearth, the soft snore of a man too exhausted to dream, the muted sob of Mira somewhere in the dark. Outside, the river kept moving, indifferent. And beyond the river, the forest waited. Something had taken a child and dragged him north toward rot and ruins. Something that did not announce itself with fire. Something that left a sourness in blood. I opened my eyes. The hunt I'd been paid for was over. The hunt that mattered was about to begin. At first light, I would go into the marsh, and whatever lived there would learn a simple truth. I do not hate monsters. Hate is for stories. I hunt them because I must. Because someone has to walk into the dark with open eyes. And because my spear, scarred, rune-carved, honest, knows the shape of death better than any prayer. To be continued.
For more content like this, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe.